They laughed when the single dad janitor was asked to spar 10 elite female commandos just for fun. No one expected him to say yes. No one knew who he really was. But what he did next left the entire gym in stunned silence. This isn't just a story about fighting. It's about dignity, redemption, and a love that rose quietly from the ashes of humiliation. Now let's begin. You call that a mop, Dalton? Looks like you're training it for battle. The voice rang out sharp and amused, bouncing off the polished walls of the military training hall. Wes Dalton didn't pause. He kept pushing the mop across the gym floor, slow and steady, like he hadn't heard the remark at all. His sleeves were rolled up, exposing forearms that still looked like they remembered how to break someone's guard. But Wes didn't fight anymore. Not with fists, not with words, not even with pride. Behind him, a group of female commandos snickered. Young, sharp elite, each of them could drop a full-grown man in under 30 seconds. They trained hard, talked louder, and laughed even harder when the joke landed on someone like him. "Hey, Wes," another voice joined in this one, softer, almost pitying. It was Private Langley, the youngest of the bunch. "Do they teach janitor technique at basic training, or did you invent it?" Wes turned to wring out the mop. The water in the bucket was almost clean now, like the floor, like he preferred it. "I just clean up after the strong ones," he said, not looking up. That should have ended it. But it didn't. Staff Sergeant Redman entered the gym, his boots echoing like a drum line. The room fell into semi-silence, just enough for him to know he had the room. "Dalton," he barked. Wes looked up, calm, unreadable. Redman grinned and pointed to the mat in the center. "We've got a VIP tour this afternoon. Senator's daughter wants to see the girls in action. I need a demo. You up for a little fun?" Wes blinked slowly. "Fun?" "Yeah," Redman said, slapping a palm against one of the padded columns. "You know, fun. You on the mat. Them showing off. I'm not trained," Wes said simply. "Oh, come on," Redman scoffed. "You're ex-military. You know enough to fall properly." The girl snickered again. Wes didn't move. "You're serious?" Riley Moore's voice cut across the room. Her tone wasn't loud, but it was pointed. Redman turned to her. "You got a problem?" More Riley hesitated, then met his gaze. "It's just—" "He's not a prop." Redman's face twisted into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "No one's asking him to take a punch. It's for morale, for demonstration. He's not exactly fragile." Behind him, one of the other commandos stepped forward with a mischievous grin. She picked up a sweat towel from the floor, walked up to Wes, and tossed it gently onto his head. The room erupted in laughter. Wes slowly reached up, took the towel off, folded it in half, and placed it on the bench beside him. He looked at no one. Not the sergeant. Not the girl. Not even Riley, whose eyes were now fixed on the floor. Mr. Dalton Redman said, still grinning, "This is an opportunity to be part of something. Better than pushing a mop all day." Wes met his eyes for the first time. "I know exactly what I'm part of, Sergeant." Redman blinked. "I'll clean your mats," Wes continued. "I won't be your circus act." Redman chuckled like he hadn't been slighted. "Suit yourself," he said, turning to the group. "But don't say I never gave the janitor a chance to be somebody." Riley's hand tightened around her canteen. One of the other commandos, Jackson, leaned into her and whispered, "Relax. If he can't handle a joke, he doesn't belong here." Riley didn't answer. Her eyes were still locked on Wes, who had gone back to his bucket like nothing had happened. Later that afternoon, after the demo was over, after the senator's daughter had been clapped and photographed, Wes remained. Alone. The mats were quiet now. He wiped them carefully, moving in long, even strokes. The double doors swung open behind him. "Hey." He turned. Riley stood there, half in uniform, half in apology. "I didn't laugh," she said. "I know." A pause. Then she added, "You've got this look in your eyes. Like you've seen everything. Wes gave a ghost of a smile. I've seen enough to know when I'm being sized up for someone else's punchline. I'm sorry, she said. For them. You don't need to be, he replied. They're young. They think being strong means making someone else feel small. She took a step forward. What does it mean to you? Wes wrung out the mop again. The silence stretched. He didn't answer her directly. Instead, he said, There's a difference between training for war and learning not to become it. Riley blinked. That was not what she expected. She looked down at her boots. You used to be someone, she said. I still am, Wes replied, just not someone who needs to prove it. She nodded slowly, and before she turned to leave, she asked if they asked again. If it wasn't for fun. Would you ever say, yes? Wes looked up. His voice was calm, clear. When someone forgets what respect is, sometimes silence isn't enough. Riley said nothing more, but the way she looked at him changed, and somewhere deep in the belly of the base, a quiet shift began to unfold, like the slow draw of breath before a storm. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the training hall as Riley Moore sank onto the wooden bench, tying her boots with mechanical precision. Her fingers moved quickly, but her thoughts were scattered, still tangled in the quiet strength of a man who had refused to be humiliated. She could still see him in her mind. The way Wes Dalton had folded the towel, the way he had absorbed the room's laughter like a sponge, soaks up water silently, completely, without a drip of resistance. That wasn't weakness. It was something else. Something older. Something heavier. You good, Private Langley flopped down beside her, unbothered and breathless from the afternoon sparring drills. Riley nodded, not looking up. Langley leaned closer. You didn't laugh earlier. When they threw the towel? I wasn't amused. Langley smirked. Come on. He's just the janitor. He should have taken the joke like a man. Riley stood up sharply. Taking it like a man doesn't mean swallowing disrespect. Langley blinked. Whoa. Okay. Riley walked off, jaw clenched. She wasn't angry at Langley. Not really. It was the system that bothered her. The hierarchy of ego disguised as discipline. The performance of power. Somewhere along the line, some people had forgotten that real strength doesn't need an audience. She exited the training hall into the late autumn air. The sun was hanging low, spilling gold across the barracks. The wind was brisk, catching her ponytail and tugging it like a child asking for attention. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the breeze cool the heat behind them. That evening, in the quiet hum of the mess hall, Riley sat across from her roommate, Corporal Jenna Blake, a sharp-eyed, sharper-tongued soldier with 5 years and 2 deployments behind her. Heard about what happened with the janitor, Jenna said, spearing a piece of chicken. Riley stirred her mashed potatoes. It wasn't right. Jenna chewed, swallowed, and leaned back. It never is. But you speak up. You get marked. Riley looked up. You're telling me to stay quiet. I'm telling you that there's a difference between being right and being smart. Riley set down her fork. Maybe it's time someone decided to be both. Jenna stared at her for a moment, then gave a small, slow nod of respect. You got guts, Moore. Just don't waste them. The next morning started with rain. Not the dramatic kind, just that steady military drizzle that soaks your socks before your coffee cools. Wes was already in the gym by the time Riley arrived, mopping the hall in long, deliberate strokes. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, like 2 musicians tuning their instruments before a symphony. You're early, Wes said without looking up. I like quiet mornings, Riley replied. You and me both. She hesitated, then stepped onto the mat watching him. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. You ever train? Like formally, Wes paused. A while back. Must have been good. He looked at her now, his eyes steady. good enough to know when not to fight. Riley stepped closer, her voice low. I think you scared them. I wasn't trying to. Doesn't matter, she said. They felt it. Something in the way you stood. The way you didn't flinch. Wes leaned against the mop. People forget. Real power doesn't shout. It waits. That's why I'm here, Riley said softly. I'm tired of noise. He tilted his head. You're not like the others. I'm not trying to be. Wes gave a half smile. That's the hard part. Trying to be yourself in a place where everyone's performing. Riley looked down, then up again. My dad used to say that. He was a soldier too. Is that why you joined? She hesitated. It's part of it. But mostly, I joined to prove something. That I wasn't fragile. That I could carry weight. Wes's voice lowered. And now I'm wondering what I was really carrying. They stood in silence. Two people from different generations cut from similar cloth, frayed at the edges, but still holding. Then Riley said, I know you don't want to be seen, but people already noticed you. It's too late to be invisible. Wes didn't answer right away. Then he said, almost like a whisper, I didn't disappear to hide. I disappeared because too many people thought they knew who I was, and none of them asked. Well, I'm asking, Riley said, because I don't think you're here just to mop the floor. Wes looked at her, and for the first time his gaze lingered, not with caution, but with a quiet kind of acceptance. I didn't come here to be noticed, he said. But I think maybe it's time I stop hiding. Later that day, while the others were stretching before drills, Redman walked past Wes without a word, just a smirk and a glance. He hadn't forgotten. Neither had the others. But somewhere in the back, Riley stood watching. And this time, she wasn't alone. Corporal Jenna joined her, arms crossed. He doesn't talk much, huh? No, Riley said. But when he does, it matters. Jenna nodded. That's the kind of man people underestimate. Until they don't. Riley smiled to herself, because something was shifting. And the quiet man with the mop. He was about to remind them all what silence could do. The air inside the training center was tight with anticipation that morning. Not from drills or combat prep, but from the scent of something brewing, something unsaid. Posters had gone up around the base overnight. Military Appreciation Day, open door exhibition, public welcome. Demonstrations scheduled at 1400 hours. Redman strutted past the formation like a rooster before a storm. He didn't need a megaphone. His presence had always been loud enough. Ladies, he barked, clapping his hands. Big day today. Cameras, visitors, civilians who think soldiers are robots and war is a video game. Let's show them how real warriors look. Some of the younger commandos smiled with anticipation. Others, like Riley, stayed quiet. Her jaw tightened when she caught sight of Redman eyeing the janitor across the mat. Wes was wiping down the far edge of the gym floor, slow and methodical, as always. But this time his movement seemed tighter, measured. Redman turned to the group. I want a demo match this afternoon, hand to hand. Full gear, controlled force. He paused, scanning the room. And to make it interesting, we'll have a civilian on the mat. Riley's stomach dropped. You mean a guest volunteer? Someone asked. Redman smirked. Not quite. I'm talking about our very own mop-handling shadow. Mr. Dalton? The room broke into laughter. Langley clapped. Come on, that's gold. Riley stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. With respect, Sergeant. He's not a toy. Redman raised an eyebrow. Relax more. No one's getting hurt. Just a quick demo to show reflexes and technique. What better way to illustrate how hard our job is than putting an untrained guy on the mat? He's not untrained, Riley said under her breath. Redman heard. He cocked his head. What's that? Riley hesitated. Nothing, sir. Redmond grinned, satisfied. Thought so. He turned and called across the mat. Dalton, you busy polishing the corners, or you got time to help the military look good today? Wes looked up. Mop paused in his hand. There was no emotion in his face, no resistance, just that long, unreadable silence that had become his armor. I'm not in uniform, he said simply. Redmond took a slow, theatrical step forward. That never stopped a patriot. Wes straightened, still holding the mop. With respect. I clean your floors. I don't entertain. Come on, man, Redman pressed, voice booming. You used to serve. You know how this works. It's all show until it's real. You're just the warm-up act. Wes's knuckles whitened around the mop handle. Then someone said something that changed everything. It was Langley again, snickering from the back. Maybe he's afraid to get hit by a girl. The room cracked open in laughter, harmless to them, deadly to Wes. Riley turned sharply. That's enough. But the damage was done. Wes let out a slow breath, lowered the mop to the bucket, and finally met Redmond's eyes. When he asked, voice like dry wind through steel. Redmond blinked. You serious I'm not stepping into a circus, Wes said. But if you're putting me on that mat, it won't be for fun. The room went silent. He walked away, not toward the exit, but toward the locker room, his steps neither rushed nor loud, just deliberate. Jenna leaned in to Riley and whispered, Well, damn. 2 hours later, Riley found him alone in the empty corridor behind the training center. He was tying the laces of old boots, not government-issued, not new, but well-kept. Familiar. You don't have to do this, she said gently. Wes didn't look up. It's already done. Riley stepped closer. They're doing it for sport. You don't owe them anything. He finally met her eyes. They weren't laughing at me. She swallowed. Then who my daughter was in the room yesterday. Riley's voice softened. The little girl in the hoodie. Wes nodded. She thinks I train soldiers. I promised her one day someone would clap for me again. Riley's throat tightened. I thought disappearing was noble, he continued, until I realized silence in the wrong room sounds a lot like shame. She reached for something to say, but Wes stood tightening his bootstraps. I'm not gonna fight, he added. I'm gonna show them why they never should have asked. Back in the gym, the mats had been arranged. Spectators filled the bleachers. Civilians, in jeans, officers in dress uniforms, and soldiers everywhere. Phones were out. Cameras on. Redman took the mic. This afternoon you'll witness a basic controlled engagement our elite female soldiers versus a volunteer from our own base support staff. Light chuckles. Let's give it up for Mr. Wes Dalton. Wes stepped out, not in uniform, just a gray training shirt and the weight of years behind his eyes. The applause was polite, scattered. Then the announcer called Private First Class Langley. You're up. Riley turned away, and on the far side of the mat, Wes shifted his stance, not flashy, not threatening, but solid. Centered. Balanced. Riley watched him from the sidelines, whispering to herself. Don't show them you're strong. Show them why silence is the loudest answer. And as the first opponent stepped forward, something flickered in the air. Not excitement, not fear, but the stillness before a storm that no one saw coming. The locker room was colder than usual. Wes stood in front of the old metal bench, the same one he'd passed every day without pause. But today, he sat down, slowly, deliberately, like a man preparing for something sacred. His locker creaked open with the reluctant groan of something long untouched. Inside wasn't much, just a small canvas duffel neatly folded. He reached in and unzipped it. First came a pair of old hand wraps, frayed at the edges, softened by time and sweat. He held them gently the way you hold something that once mattered more than your name. Then, at the very bottom, wrapped in an old white towel like a secret he never meant to share, the belt. Black, cracked, faded. A belt that once drew cheers in packed arenas and silence in hospital corridors. He held it in both hands. For a long time he didn't move. Across the gym the crowd buzzed. Officers in full dress uniforms stood with arms crossed. Families clutched cups of coffee. Cadets leaned in, hungry for entertainment. "Do you think he'll actually show up?" someone whispered. "I heard he used to fight pro." "Doubt it. He moves like a janitor." On the mat, Langley bounced in place, stretching her shoulders, gloves already on. She turned to her teammate. "He's probably going to freeze up the second I go in. You think I should go easy?" The teammate shrugged. "You think Redmond wants mercy?" Langley grinned. "Fair point." From the sidelines, Riley stood still, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Jenna leaned beside her, whispering low. "You don't look too excited. This isn't a demo," Riley said. "It's bait. And they're about to find out the hook is sharper than they thought." Then the door opened, and Wes walked in. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady. No warm-ups, no showmanship. Just that faded belt tied around his waist over a gray t-shirt and sweatpants. The air changed. Some of the older officers in the crowd straightened. One leaned to another and muttered, "That can't be him." "Who?" The man didn't answer. He just watched. Redmond stepped forward with a grin stretched too wide. "Look who finally decided to play soldier." Wes didn't acknowledge him. He walked straight to the mat. Langley raised her gloves. "You ready, Grandpa?" Wes nodded once. "Always." The bell didn't ring. There was no bell, just a nod from Redmond, and the first step forward. Langley advanced quickly, textbook footing, balanced weight. She faked, left, pivoted right, came in with a jab. Wes didn't move. She jabbed again, clean sharp. Still nothing. Then, without warning, she snapped a kick to his thigh. Hard. Wes absorbed it without flinching. He stepped back a half pace. Just one. Langley frowned. Came again. Faster now. 2 punches and a kick. This time Wes moved. Not fast, not flashy, but perfect. He pivoted, used her momentum, and guided her shoulder forward with the lightest touch of his left palm. She stumbled. Not a fall, but off balance. He didn't press. He let her reset. The room grew quiet. Redmond's grin faded. Langley's eyes sharpened. She launched again, aggressive now. 3 strikes, low-high combo. She was good. Precise. But Wes was somewhere else. 1 step. 1 tilt of the hip. 1 half-turn of the torso. And suddenly she was behind him, arms wide, completely exposed. He could have dropped her. But instead he stepped back. Langley stood, blinking, heart racing. "You're not fighting," she hissed. "I am," Wes said calmly. "Just not against you." Langley charged again, frustration thick in her chest. Wes waited, and this time he did touch her. He caught her wrist, redirected the punch, spun slightly, and gently placed his foot behind hers. She fell. Not hard. Not dangerous. But clean. Controlled. She landed flat on her back, breath knocked out, blinking at the ceiling. Wes stepped back, offering no expression. The crowd exhaled. Someone in the back whispered. "Did you see that?" Redmond barked more. "You're up," Riley blinked. "What you said, he's not a joke. Let's see if you can prove it." There was silence. Then movement. Riley took off her outer jacket and stepped onto the mat. Her eyes met Wes's. "You okay?" He nodded. "You don't have to prove anything," she said quietly. Wes looked at her. "I'm not here to prove. I'm here to remind." She didn't ask what that meant. She just bowed. He returned it. Then they moved. Not a fight. A dance. Riley came in fast, sharp elbow feint, spin kick attempt. Wes parried, deflected, mirrored. They flowed around each other in an elegant exchange of control and concession. No audience. No victor. Just respect. Then it ended. Riley stepped back, breathing hard. "You taught someone I loved," she whispered. "Didn't you?" Wes met her eyes. "I taught a lot of people. But some taught me more in return." Redmond stepped forward, face flushed. "That's enough. Someone get me gloves. I'll go next." But Wes turned to the crowd. His voice, for the first time, rose above the walls. "You called this a demonstration, so let's make it one." He looked directly at Redmond. "This mat isn't for showing off. It's for showing up. And you don't get to teach humility until you've learned it." The room froze. Redmond hesitated. Wes dropped his stance, stepped back. "This belt," he said, touching the worn fabric at his waist. "It's not for fighting. It's for remembering." He turned to leave. Behind him, no one laughed. No one clapped. But for the first time they saw him. Not the mop. Not the man who walked in silence. They saw the belt, and the weight it carried. The rain came in soft that evening, whispering against the steel roofs, like it knew secrets the wind couldn't carry. Most of the base had returned to routine chatter in the mess hall booths, echoing through the corridors, laughter in the barracks. But something had changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even spoken aloud. It was just there in the way people avoided eye contact with Wes Dalton or looked too long before turning away. The footage had made its way around. Cell phones had recorded just enough of his quiet dismantling of Langley and the respectful dance with Riley. But it wasn't the movements that unsettled people. It was the calm, the restraint, the control. It wasn't showy. It was undeniable. Langley sat alone in the corner of the weight room, her bruised pride more tender than her elbow. Riley approached with a towel and 2 protein bars. Langley looked up, then down again. He didn't even try. And I still ended up on my back. Riley sat beside her. "You didn't lose." Langley gave a dry laugh. "Sure felt like it." "No," Riley said. "You just got reminded." Langley looked at her, of what Riley took a breath. "That power isn't what we're told. It's not volume, not aggression. It's how you carry the things you could do, but choose not to." Langley fell silent. "Then he knew everything I was going to do. He's been doing this longer than we've been alive," Riley said quietly. "He used to be someone. Still is." Langley blinked. "Who is he?" Riley hesitated, then stood. "That's the thing, Langley. He's someone who walked away when he didn't have to. And that says more than anything written on a belt." That night, Wes sat on a bench outside the equipment bay. His boots were wet. So was his soul. The old black belt sat coiled beside him like a silent witness. He didn't wear it anymore. He'd returned it to the canvas bag after the match, but something about it still echoed in his bones. Riley approached her steps quiet. "You didn't stay for the debrief," she said. "I never do." She sat beside him close enough to feel the silence, but not break it. "Langley's quiet," she added. "She'll be fine. She's confused." Wes nodded. "Good. Confusion is where real learning begins." Riley folded her arms. "You said earlier you were here to remind them." "I did." "Then tell me, what are you here to remind them?" Of Wes looked down at his hands. Weathered. Steady. Clean. That strength without restraint is just violence in uniform. She was quiet for a long beat, then whispered, "Did something happen?" He didn't answer right away. But then he did. 22 years ago he began. I walked into the biggest ring of my life. National title bout. Vegas. Lights so bright they blurred your thoughts. Riley leaned in. I fought a man I respected. A friend. We'd trained together. Ate together. Bled together. He paused. I knocked him out in the 3rd round. He never woke up. Riley's breath caught. The doctor said it was an accident. Wes continued. Wrong angle. Wrong fall. But I knew better. He looked at her voice, barely a whisper. I was angry that night. Not at him. at the crowd, the slurs, the politics, the noise. I lost control for 1 second, and someone else lost a future. Riley placed a hand on his. Firm. Present. You didn't mean to. I trained for years not to. And when it mattered, I didn't stop myself. He looked away. That's why I walked. From the sport. From the spotlight. From everything. I wasn't scared of fighting again. I was scared I'd forget. Again. Silence. Then Riley said softly, but clearly, "You didn't forget today." Wes turned. "You stepped in when no one else would. You didn't humiliate anyone. You didn't take from them. You gave them a lesson they'll carry longer than any trophy." Wes smiled faintly. "You speak like someone older than 23, she smirked. "Military life ages you." He looked at her. Really looked. "You remind me of someone," he said. She tilted her head. "Someone good." He nodded. "Someone who once believed there's no such thing as wasted pain, just unused purpose." Riley's voice softened. "Then maybe it's time you use yours again." Later that night, Riley opened her laptop in the barracks. She searched a name she'd heard whispered from one of the officers after the match. Silent Belt. Hundreds of results. Video clips. Headlines. Forum debates. The man who could end a match without a single bruise. Retired undefeated after a tragic bout. The ghost who walked away at his peak. She stared at a grainy photo of Wes, 22 years younger. Same eyes. Same silence. A different kind of weight. And then she saw it buried deep in a comment thread from years ago. He wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but when he looked at you in the ring, you felt like you were standing in front of something bigger than fear. Riley leaned back in her chair and whispered to herself, "They don't know who they laughed at, but they would." Soon, the next morning, the gym floor gleamed like a mirror beneath the overhead lights. You could see yourself in it, every scar, every doubt, every quiet promise you hadn't yet fulfilled. Wes stood barefoot on the mat, alone. His sweatshirt hung from a nearby hook. His belt was nowhere to be seen. He didn't need it. Not anymore. Across from him stood the 10. 10 elite female commandos. Not cruel, not malicious. Just young. Hungry. Trained to follow orders and conditioned to believe they had nothing left to learn. Redmond stood off to the side like a conductor before an orchestra. "All right," he said, clapping his hands. "Controlled engagement. All 10 go in staggered, not simultaneous. I want them moving, working together. Think of this as a stress test. For both sides." Riley stood near the bench, her arms crossed, eyes narrowed. She whispered to Jenna, "This isn't about training. This is about punishment." Jenna replied under her breath, "Then he's about to teach them the price of arrogance." Wes closed his eyes for a moment. He didn't hear noise anymore. Not the footsteps, not the scuffs, not even the breath of anticipation. He'd trained for years in silence. The world had forgotten how loud stillness could be. The first opponent came in fast, Langley again. This time, she moved with calculation, not pride. She jabbed low, swept high, testing his response. Wes sidestepped, redirected her arm, and gently redirected her weight. She stumbled, caught herself reset. Second one entered. A heavier fighter, Corporal Vasquez. She feinted left and drove hard with her shoulder going for a grapple. Wes dropped low, twisted his hips, and used her momentum to roll her harmlessly to the floor. The audience gasped. 2 down. 3 more joined in. The mat filled with motion punches, kicks, pressure. But Wes wasn't in any one place. He moved like water finding the cracks. He didn't block. He guided. He didn't hit. He showed them where the danger was. It wasn't a fight. It was a masterclass. Redmond's face soured. "This is supposed to be hand-to-hand, not interpretive dance," he snapped. But no one laughed. They were watching something they didn't understand, yet couldn't look away from. One of the girls, Private O'Connell, managed to get behind Wes. She wrapped her arm around his neck in a rear choke. Wes didn't panic. He stepped backward, bent, slightly shifted her weight, and with a soft grunt, slid her off his back and onto her feet. "I'm not your enemy," he said gently. She blinked, breath caught, then stepped away. One by one they came, and one by one he let them see what power could look like when it didn't need to hurt. By the end, 8 stood at the edge of the mat, winded, wide-eyed, reverent. Only Riley and one other remained. Redmond barked, "More finish it." Riley didn't move. "Soldier." She stepped forward slowly. Her boots thudded softly across the mat. She pulled her hair back into a tie, then faced Wes. He gave her a soft nod. "We don't have to do this," she said. "I know. But they need to see what it looks like when respect meets resistance." He gave a faint smile. "Then let's show them." They bowed. And the moment they moved, it was like 2 streams colliding without losing themselves. Riley didn't hold back. She used her full-form fluidity precision force where needed. She struck high. Low spun countered. Wes matched her, but he never overpowered. It wasn't dominance. It was dialogue spoken in muscle and breath. Their sparring built to a rhythm. The room was silent, but for the sound of movement, bodies speaking in the language of trust. At one point, Riley landed a light tap on his shoulder. Wes stepped back, smiled. "Good." She smiled back. "Didn't think I'd get that close." "You did." They stopped. She bowed again, deeper this time. He returned it, then turned to the others. Wes looked at each of the soldiers he'd just faced. No one met his gaze with laughter now. Only stillness. "Strength," he said, voice steady, "isn't measured by how hard you can hit. It's measured by how much you choose not to." Redman scoffed from the sidelines. "Is that your philosophy? Lose gracefully and lecture about it." Wes turned to him slowly. "No," he replied. "My philosophy is simple. Lead quietly or don't lead at all." The room held its breath. And then, as if on cue, Langley took a step forward. She saluted. I'd train under him. Another followed. Then another. Until all 10 stood behind Wes, shoulder to shoulder. Not in protest, in respect. Redman clenched his jaw, but said nothing. He didn't have to. The lesson had already been delivered. And the silence in the room, it was the sound of something finally sinking in. That night, the gym didn't echo with footsteps or barked orders. Just the quiet hum of the ceiling lights and the low whir of a janitor's floor buffer, forgotten in the corner. Wes sat alone on the bench in the locker room towel draped over his neck, his palms resting on his knees. His knuckles were red, but not from violence, just the weight of restraint. The door creaked open. Riley entered still in uniform, her blonde hair damp with sweat, a duffel slung over one shoulder. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "You held back," she said, her voice low but clear. Wes didn't look up. "I always do." She sat across from him. For a long beat there was only the sound of water dripping somewhere in the far pipe. "You could have humiliated us," she said. "Every one of us." "I'm not interested in breaking people," Wes replied, "only helping them stand." She let out a breath. "That's not something they teach in our training manuals. That's why it matters." Riley leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "You know, when I first saw you mopping the floor, I thought, what's a guy like that doing here?" And now he asked. She smiled, a little sad. "Now, I wonder what it cost you to disappear." Wes finally looked up. There was no defensiveness in his eyes, only honesty, and pain that had learned how to sit still. "You ever meet someone," he said slowly, "who fought like they were carrying the weight of someone else's silence?" Riley nodded. "My daughter," he continued. "She used to ask me why I never got angry. Why, I never yelled like the other dads. And what did you tell her? I told her. Real strength isn't loud. It's not fists. It's showing up, even when the world forgets your name. Riley looked away for a moment. She must be proud. Wes hesitated, then softly. She passed 3 winters ago. Cancer. She was 11. Riley's lips parted slightly as if air had been knocked from her chest. I'm sorry, she whispered. Wes gave a quiet nod. She was the reason I stopped fighting. Until today. You didn't fight, Riley said, her voice firm. You reminded them, all of us, what it really means to serve. He met her eyes, and in that gaze was something unspoken. A bridge quietly built between 2 people carrying things too heavy for words. She stood slowly. You taught them more in 1 day than some leaders manage in a decade, she said. I didn't teach, he replied. I just remembered. She paused at the door. They asked me to write the report. Redmond stormed out after the match. Wes gave a wry smile. Let me guess, insubordination through enlightenment. She chuckled. Something like that. Then her smile faded to something gentler. But I'm not writing it for them. I'm writing it for whoever comes next. They should know what it looks like when a man refuses to be reduced. That night, as the base lights dimmed and soldiers retreated to barracks, Riley sat on her bunk with her laptop open. But instead of typing the usual formal report, she wrote a letter. Not to command, to her younger self. You won't recognize him when he walks in. He won't look like a hero. He won't wear stripes or bark orders. But he'll hold his silence like armor, and when the time comes, he'll use his hands not to destroy, but to protect, to remind, to restore. When the world asks for spectacle, he'll offer humility, and it'll shake you more than violence ever could. She paused, then continued typing. You'll see strength not in the way he stands, but in how he lets others stand taller after him. And when he looks at you with those tired eyes, you'll realize some warriors don't need medals, just someone who sees them. She didn't sign it. Some things didn't need names. The next morning, Wes returned to the gym before sunrise, mop in hand. The floor was already spotless, but he moved anyway, not to clean, but to remember his place. Not above. Among. Then came the sound of footsteps. He turned. Riley walked in holding 2 coffees and a small bag. Figured you'd be here. I'm predictable, he said, accepting the cup. No, she smiled. You're steady. They stood in silence for a moment, sipping. Then Riley asked, if you could do it again, would you have let them know who you were from the beginning? Wes shook his head. No. Sometimes people only listen after they've laughed. She stared at him. You deserve better than this floor. He glanced down. Maybe. But this floor taught me humility, and that might be worth more than any belt I ever earned. She hesitated, then quietly said, We could use someone like you in training command. He looked at her. Really looked. What about you? He asked. What do you need? She blinked. He nodded. Riley stepped closer, then placed her coffee down on the bench. I think she said, voice steady but soft. I need to believe that good men still exist, that kindness isn't weakness, that maybe broken things can still be made whole. Wes didn't speak. He didn't need to. Instead, he reached into his pocket and handed her something small, a child's bracelet faded, worn, made of yarn. It was hers, he said. The day she died, she asked me to give it to someone who reminded me of her. Riley looked down at the bracelet, hands trembling. What did she remind you of? She whispered. Hope, Wes said. Even in the worst of storms. She slid the bracelet onto her wrist and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was light, subtle, soft, but undeniable. And in that moment, two warriors stood side by side, not because of rank, but because they'd survived enough silence to finally hear each other. Of course, here's the next chapter. The hall was quiet. Not the usual silence of early morning, but something deeper, like a held breath that refused to be released. Wes stood in the center of the gym barefoot on the mat. The echoes of yesterday's clash still clung to the air. A new scuff mark on the wall, a split seam in one of the practice pads, ghosts of motion. He knelt, fingers brushing over the fabric of the mat as if reading some invisible history. Behind him, a soft voice broke the stillness. "I found something," Riley said. Wes turned. She was holding a faded black belt, folded neatly with frayed edges, and a nearly worn-off embroidery WD. "I saw it tucked behind a broken vent near the storage room," she added. "You hid it well." Wes looked at the belt, but didn't move toward it. "I didn't hide it," he said. "I buried it." Riley stepped forward. "Why?" He took a breath, because titles become cages, and I'd already broken too many things trying to live inside one. She nodded slowly. "But you didn't just walk away from the belt. You walked away from the world that gave it meaning." Wes stared at the belt, eyes distant. "It gave me meaning once. Then it took more than it gave." Riley held the belt out to him, but he shook his head. "I don't need to wear it to remember who I am." She let her arms drop slightly. Maybe not. But others might need to see it to believe in who they could become. Later that day, Command called Riley in. The board had reconvened. Redman had filed an official grievance. They wanted clarification. She entered the room with measured steps, the weight of the moment not lost on her. Colonel Gaines sat at the head of the table. His voice, always crisp, carried a little extra edge today. "You requested to speak before our ruling?" "Yes, sir," Riley replied. He gestured. "Proceed." Riley didn't bring notes. She didn't need them. "I've served under hard men, brilliant tacticians, ruthless fighters. But I've never learned more in one day than I did from a janitor who never asked to be noticed." There was a murmur in the room. He didn't step on that mat to prove anything. He stepped on because no one else had the courage to stop what had become cruelty, masquerading as tradition. Another officer scoffed. "You're defending insubordination." "I'm defending integrity," she shot back firm. "There's a difference." Colonel Gaines leaned forward. "Are you saying the chain of command is flawed?" "I'm saying." She said, locking eyes with him, that when a man who's seen more war than any of us walks into our gym and chooses mercy over dominance, we should pay attention. Because that is leadership. And if we're too proud to learn from a mop-wielding warrior, maybe the fault isn't in him. Silence stretched. Then Gaines asked quietly, "What do you propose?" She didn't blink. Make him an instructor. Not in rank, but in principle. Let the next generation see what quiet strength looks like. Let them know that the greatest belt doesn't go around your waist. It wraps around the hearts of those you lift. Wes waited outside. He wasn't nervous. Not because he didn't care, but because he had finally stopped letting other people define what his value looked like. Riley emerged, her eyes searching his. "Well," he asked. "They want to talk to you," she said. "Not punish. Just understand." "That's new," he smiled. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You once told me silence was your strength. But sometimes, silence hides things that need to be spoken." He held her gaze. "Like what?" "Like the fact that you didn't just walk away from the fight. You walked away from connection, from being seen. Maybe it's time to stop hiding behind humility." Wes exhaled. "I never knew how to be anything else." "You already are," she said softly. "You just haven't let the world catch up." She paused, then pulled something from her pocket. The belt. Still worn, still faded. But now, waiting. "I'm not giving this back to the fighter you were," she said. "I'm giving it to the man you've become." Wes reached out, took it, held it in both hands, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel heavy. That night, the gym was full again, but not with mocking laughter, with something new. Reverence. Wes stood barefoot once more, not as janitor, not as shadow, but as teacher. Soldiers circled the mat watching him, not with skepticism but awe. He didn't start with a demonstration. He started with a question. What's the strongest part of a warrior? Someone called out his hands. Another, his speed. Wes waited, then said, his choice. He walked slowly across the mat eye, scanning the room. Strength isn't in muscle. It's in what you choose to do with it. I've broken bones in my past. That's easy. But lifting someone up after they've lost everything, that takes more. He stopped at the edge of the circle, held up the belt. This isn't a trophy. It's a reminder that every day you show up with restraint, with discipline, with compassion, you earn this all over again. And then he tied it around his waist. Not as a declaration, as a beginning. Riley watched from the back, a quiet smile touching her lips, and in her chest, something loosened. The past had not vanished, but it had finally been given purpose. And beside her, one of the younger soldiers whispered, "Who is that guy?" Riley replied softly. "The man who showed us the belt isn't around his waist. It's in his heart. You were never just the janitor, were you?" Riley's voice was quiet, almost reverent as she stood beside Wes outside the gym. The evening wind stirred loose strands of her hair, and in her eyes, 100 unspoken questions shimmered. Wes gave a soft laugh, one without mockery. I was, for a while, and honestly, it saved me. They leaned against the concrete wall shadow, stretching long under the amber wash of a street lamp. The gym behind them still echoed with the awe-struck silence of soldiers who had just witnessed something rare, a man teaching not with ego, but with experience earned in silence. Riley folded her arms, her tone shifting. "You said you buried your belt, but I think you buried more than that." Wes didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a weathered photograph creased at the edges, slightly faded. A woman with laughing eyes, a little girl on her lap, maybe 5 years old, both smiling. Alive. "My wife and daughter?" he said, voice low but steady. 10 years ago, they were hit by a drunk driver coming home from a recital. Riley's breath caught. "Wes, I was supposed to be there," he continued, eyes locked on the photo. "I stayed late teaching a seminar for young fighters, prepping them for competition. Thought it mattered more. Thought they'd be fine." He looked up, his voice hoarse but unwavering. And just like that, the music stopped. Riley said nothing, just stood beside him, still respectful. The weight of the truth, heavier than any uniform. Wes tucked the photo away. "I left everything after that. Sold the house, gave up the dojo, went off grid. The fights, the discipline, it all felt meaningless without them. I took janitor jobs because they were quiet. No one asked for your story when you were scrubbing toilets." Riley's voice cracked softly. "But now you're here, teaching again." Wes nodded. "Because of you." She blinked. "Me, you were the first person in years who didn't look past me, who didn't need a title to listen. You saw the man, not the mop." He turned to face her fully now, the streetlight drawing golden lines across the sorrow in his face. "You reminded me that healing doesn't always mean going back. Sometimes it means going forward with the scar." Riley stepped closer. "You think I'm not carrying mine?" Wes studied her, and in that moment she let the curtain fall. "I lost someone too. Iraq. My brother. We served together. He stepped on a pressure plate meant for me." Silence fell again, but it wasn't empty. It was shared. Sacred. Wes finally spoke. We walk around in uniforms or old pain thinking that makes us invincible. But real strength is letting someone see the wound and not looking away. She met his gaze. Then you're the strongest man I've ever met. He didn't smile, not fully, but the lines on his face softened like stone that had finally surrendered to water. The next morning, Wes was up before dawn. He stood alone on the mat, the black belt tied once more around his waist. But this time, it didn't carry the weight of who he was. It carried the promise of who he could help others become. Students filed in, not just curious now, but eager. They'd heard whispers from the last session. The janitor who moved like air. The man who dropped 2 black belts without a shout. But it wasn't the fight they remembered. It was the silence that followed. The reverence. Wes clapped once, drawing them in. His voice, calm and grounded, filled the space. Today we don't train for violence. We train for control. Because power without mercy is weakness in disguise. A younger recruit raised his hand. But what if someone's pushing you? Provoking you? Wes didn't flinch. He walked toward the boy, knelt beside him, and looked him straight in the eye. You can't stop someone from swinging, he said, but you can decide whether you swing back as a man or an animal. The gym fell still again, and then from the back of the crowd, a hand clapped slowly. It was Commander Redman. Wes straightened. Tension rippled through the students like a current. But Redman didn't bark orders. He walked forward, eyes locked on Wes. I reviewed the footage, he said, and I read the testimonials. He paused. I owe you an apology. Gasps echoed around the gym like dropped pins. Wes raised a brow. Why, Redman's jaw worked for a moment before he said it. Because I mistook silence for insignificance, and that was my mistake. Wes tilted his head. What changed your mind? Redman glanced at Riley, then back. I saw the way they look at you now. Not because you beat someone, but because you chose not to destroy them. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a slip of paper. Authorization. You're now officially recognized as a civilian martial arts instructor under the Army Resilience and Leadership Training Program. If you want it. Wes didn't take it right away. He looked around the room at Riley, at the kids, at the young faces waiting to see what he'd do. Then quietly, he said, I didn't come back for a title. Redman nodded. Then take it for the ones who need someone like you, to show them what strength really looks like. This time, Wes accepted. But it wasn't the paper that mattered. It was the look on Riley's face, the kind that said, You're home now. It was just past midnight, when Wes found Riley sitting alone outside the barracks, her boots untied her elbows, resting on her knees, eyes fixed on a distant nowhere. The moonlight painted her in silver, highlighting the edges of her fatigue, but also something gentler, like her armor had finally let in air. You always sit like that when something's weighing you down, Wes asked softly as he approached. Riley didn't startle. She just let out a dry chuckle. Only when the silence is louder than the noise. He sank down beside her, the cold concrete pressing against his back. She turned her head toward him slowly. You ever get the feeling like everything you've held together with grit and duct tape is about to fall apart? The second someone says something kind. Wes looked at her long and deliberate. Kindness breaks more walls than anger ever could. Riley smiled, but it was small. Fragile. My orders came through, she said, after a beat. Wes went still. How long, he asked. 48 hours. Then I ship back out. They're redeploying my unit. It's peacekeeping. But there's no such thing as peace when you're carrying ghosts. She tried to shrug it off, but the tremble in her fingers betrayed her. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper, creased at the corners. I was going to give this to you later, he said. But maybe now is better. She hesitated, then unfolded it. It was a photograph, a small, blurry image of a dojo. Light flooding in through open wooden shutters. A faded sign overhead, harmony through strength. She stared at it, then up at him. You owned this, I built it from scratch. Right after I left the ring. Before I lost them. She held the photo tighter. What happened to it? I locked the doors the day they were buried, Wes said quietly. But it's still there. Dusty broken windows, maybe some raccoons claiming rent. She smiled at that. And this, she asked, holding it up. That's yours, he said. If you ever want it. If you ever want a place to land, or teach, or just sit. Riley's voice caught. You're giving me your dojo? Wes turned to her, his voice rich with something deeper than affection. Respect, trust, hope. I'm offering you a future. One not built on duty or loss. One that doesn't ask you to be anything but exactly who you are. For a long time, Riley said nothing. Then softly, no one's ever offered me that before. He gave a faint, wistful smile. Maybe it's time someone did. The next morning, she stood by the transport truck, her duffel slung across one shoulder, and her dog tags clinking faintly with each step. Wes was waiting, hands in his jacket pockets, that same steady calm in his eyes. I should have met you sooner, Riley said. No, Wes replied. You met me when you were supposed to, when we both had something left to teach each other. She looked down. I'm scared, Wes. He nodded. Me too. That startled her. But you're human. He finished for her. And finally learning how to feel again. She stared at him, the air growing heavier, as the truck's engine started to rumble behind her. Then, impulsively, she stepped forward and kissed him. Not the kind of kiss that burns or begs, the kind that promises. When they broke apart, she pressed something into his hand, a small, frayed red ribbon. This was my brother's, she said. He tied it around his wrist before every mission. Said it reminded him why he came back. Wes stared at the ribbon. And now it's yours, she whispered. So you remember why to stay. The truck honked. Riley turned, climbed up, and was gone. That night, Wes stood alone in the empty gym. The lights were dim, the echo of the day gone. In his hand, the red ribbon. He tied it around his wrist, not for luck, but for memory. And then barefoot he stepped onto the mat. He bowed. To no one, and to everything. 6 months later. The old dojo on Birch Hill no longer smelled of dust and silence. Sunlight filtered through newly cleaned windows, dancing across polished wooden floors. The faint scent of cedar oil lingered in the air, mingling with the distant sound of wind chimes swaying gently on the porch. A handmade sign hung proudly above the doorway. Silent Belt Dojo. Strength, honor, peace. Inside, laughter echoed. Children in crisp white jai uniforms fumbled through their stances, giggling at their own awkwardness. Wes stood barefoot in the center, guiding a boy through a simple kata. No, he said, gently crouching to meet the child's eyes. You're not pushing through the air. You're listening to it, like it's teaching you something. The boy looked confused, then curious. Wes smiled. Try again. But this time, don't fight the silence. Move with it. Across the room, Ms. Ellen, the once skeptical administrator, handed out water bottles with surprising grace. I thought this place would be full of sweat and bruises, she murmured to a parent beside her. Turns out it's full of something else entirely. The door creaked open. Wes turned, wiping his hands on a towel. And there she was, Riley, standing in the frame like she'd never left, but with a quiet storm in her eyes. Her uniform replaced by jeans, boots, and a canvas jacket with just a hint of military structure. And her smile unchanged. I missed the part where you became a local legend, she teased. He walked toward her, slowly, eyes never leaving hers. "You came back," he said, voice rough with something unspoken. She reached into her pocket and held up a key. "You said I had a place here. I finally decided to use it." Wes chuckled, then sobered. "You okay?" She nodded. Better than okay. Turns out leaving wasn't the hard part. It was realizing I didn't want to stay away. He studied her, then quietly said, "You still carrying ghosts?" Riley's gaze softened. "No," she said. "I think they're resting now." Finally. Wes didn't say anything. He just opened his arms and she stepped into them like she'd been waiting 6 months to exhale. That evening, after the last kid had bowed and gone home, Wes and Riley sat on the steps of the dojo porch. The mountains turned gold in the distance. Crickets sang. The wind was cool and steady. She held a mug of tea. He nursed a black coffee. "I watched your match," she said, smiling into the steam. "Oh yeah," he raised a brow. "The one against the twins. Someone uploaded it to military forums. It's been shared over 1 million times." Wes winced. "Please don't tell me they added slow motion." "They did," she grinned. "And heroic music. You're officially Janitor Sensei to half of Fort Langston." He laughed, shaking his head. "I didn't do it for the clicks. I know," she said softly. "That's why it mattered." A silence settled between them, not awkward, but full. "Riley," he said, voice low. "What are we now?" She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I don't know," she whispered. "But it feels like peace. Like breathing after holding it for too long." Wes looked up at the stars just starting to appear. "I used to think fighting was the only way I had value," he murmured. "But maybe the real strength is choosing not to fight. Or knowing when to stop." She took his hand, fingers interlacing naturally. "That's the belt you wear now," she said. "Not black. Not red." Silent. Later that night, inside the dojo, Wes turned off the lights one by one. He paused at the altar, a small, simple wooden shelf. On it rested 3 things: a photo of his daughter and wife smiling by the lake, a red ribbon now framed in glass, and a note Riley had left before she deployed, now laminated and tucked beneath the ribbon. "For the one who listens, fights only when needed, and loves like silence, steady and strong." Outside, the wind danced in the trees. A new generation was learning not just how to fight, but how to honor. And in the heart of a once silent man, love quiet, steadfast, and undefeated was finally home. We'd love to know where are you watching from. Drop a comment and share your thoughts. Was there a moment in this story that touched your heart? If this story moved you, if it reminded you that kindness and courage still matter in this world, please consider subscribing to Soul Moment Story, where we share true-to-the-heart tales that uplift and inspire. Thank you for spending this time with us. Your presence here means more than you know. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and keep believing in the good.